Howdy folks, I'm going to show you how to do a strip and rebuild on the Westlake Alfa 357 muzzle loading revolver. A little bit unique to the UK this, but not found any other stripped down videos on YouTube for this particular gun yet, so I'll show you how to do it. One little thing about this gun is when you buy it from Alan, who makes it, he recommends you buy his bullets. These are hollow base pure lead wad cutters, and yep, they work really good. They're lubed with airlocks, and they're pretty accurate, but they're not cheap. What I found work just as well, because I do a lot of bullet casting myself, is 105 grain Lee semi-wad cutter, 105 grain slugs. Obviously cast out of pure lead rather than alloy, but I found these little babies work really well in the revolver. They seat properly, they're accurate, and obviously I cast them myself, so they're well cheap. Obviously make sure you cast them out of lead rather than range scrap, and just lube with good old liquid airlocks. Right, let's get on with it, and I'll show you how to strip this thing down and rebuild it. First thing, take the cylinder out. It's obviously safe, empty. I've already cleaned this just yesterday, so it doesn't really need cleaning on the cylinder. So first of all, we'll take the wooden grips off. The standard Phillips screws, nothing special. One on each side. The screws are the same size, so you don't need to remember which way around they go on. Now, to take the wooden grips off, they just pull off, but they can be a little bit stiff. So what I found worked for me is a little bit of persuasion. Just lever one off. There's a bit of a gap here in between the wood and the frame, and you can just gently get the edge of a screwdriver under. There we go, it doesn't mark the metal or anything silly. Okay, so there's the wooden grips just come off. So the good news is there's 3 screws, you can take these out without anything flying up into your face or anything. There's nothing under huge spring tension apart from the main spring, and that comes out alright. You'll see in a minute. So use the right size screwdriver. These are the proper parallel blade screwdriver bits, otherwise you could mark your screws. Okay, so 3 screws on. Get in the slot. There we go. 2. And 3. Okay. Last one there. Oops. Take that out with my fingers actually. I've got it started now. All these 3 screws are the same size, so again it doesn't matter which one you put back where. Okay, so there's the 3 screws. Okay, so you can see there 3 screws. Now what I found is this entire panel does lift out, but it could be a little bit stiff. It's an interference fit inside, and it takes a bit of persuasion to come out. So I'm not sure really the best way of kind of persuading it. There's no panel on the other side. That's just a solid piece of steel on the frame. So you can't poke it out from the other side, as it were. I think the easiest way of doing it is probably get something under there and just lever it up gently. Can't really, you can feel it moving, but it's not going to come out clean. So what I'll do is get my little pair of naughty little pliers here. I'm just going to there's a gap in between the frame and the panel. I'm just going to get the end of the pliers in there and just gently lever it upwards, basically, just so it can come out. It's difficult to do this with one hand. Let's see, there's nothing under tension or anything here. That's it, I'm just going to rock it backwards and forwards a little bit. Just to get it there. You can see it's starting to come out now. I'm just pushing up each time, just gently lifting up on the back of the panel. I'm sure there's an easy way of getting this out, but since I don't have a user manual, buggered if I know what it is, pal. There you go, it's just a little bit of gentle persuasion. Yeah, it's coming up. Each time I lever it backwards and forwards, it comes up by a few mil. That's it. So it's just lift straight up, but you know, there's nothing to kind of get hold of to pull it, so you just need to lever it gently from the side. So when you lift that up, that's what it's like underneath, and there's the insides of the gun. That's the trigger pin. It's already popped free. That gives you the tension on the trigger. Now normally that trigger pin, which you can see is popped out there, that is normally tucked in against the frame here. Under tension, but obviously as I've been lifting that panel up, it's popped out. That's fine, I'll pop it back in later. It's not a problem. In fact, I'll take it out for now, just put it to one side. Okay, so you can see here, you can, with the panel off and trigger spring out, you can lift the hammer mechanism up. That'll take tension off the main spring, which just pops out a little bit here. That's its retaining washer. Let's put that to one side. The tension is now completely off the main spring. And in fact, as you can see, you can just pull the spring straight out, and there's the main spring guide rod, for want of a better term. Okay, cool. So that end of the main spring rod there, that fits inside a groove inside the hammer, and you can't really get that wrong putting it back in. It'll only go in one place, and it fits right inside there. What I would recommend is, if you're going to take your revolver apart for the first time, take a video as you do it, and take high-res pictures at each stage as well, so you know exactly where you are. So I haven't found any guides on the internet for stripping this gun down yet. Probably haven't looked in the right place, but I couldn't find any last time I looked. Okay, so what if you want to take the hammer and sears out and the trigger out to clean it or inspect it or whatever? Okay, I'll show you how to do that. First of all, you need to take this pivot pin out. This is a freestanding roller pin. Obviously you can't remove the hammer because it's in the way, so it's not a problem. You just lift the pin out with your fingers. It's not fastened in at all. And now, hey ho, there's the hammer mechanism. Comes straight out. Okay, there's the pin. Alright, cool. So, there's your pin. There's the hole it fits in. Easy peasy. A little bit of excess oil in there. Just get that away. Okay, cool. Alright, so next, this trigger mechanism. The hand. So, you can just swing. You can see what I'm doing here. I've just swung the hand in this direction. It just pivots on that pin, and if you want to, you can now lift the hand straight off the frame. Okay, and the trigger itself will now lift vertically. Okay, that's now off the gun. So just everything pretty much lifts straight out once you've reached this stage. Okay, cool. There's the trigger. So that's about it for stripping down. What's left is you've got the transfer bar, which just rides in a vertical channel here, and you've got the detent. Oops, take that out. That's the detent mechanism there for the cylinder. You can see that's spring loaded. That corresponds to that one there. So again, not much to clean there really, to be honest. Okay, so we've cleaned all the internal parts. Let's put the trigger and the hammer mechanism back together. So first thing you want to put in is the trigger. Here it is. Now there is a little pin with the trigger, this one. You'll see from the close-up images I'll include in the footage that fits in here. sometimes when you take the top cover of the revolver off, that pin is retained and it sticks in its opposite hole here. That's what happened in this case. It's not biggie, it just pulls out with your fingers, but obviously you'll need this pin. The good news is all the pins are specific to their individual holes, so the pin for the hammer is a different side to the pin for the trigger, so you can't really put the wrong pin in the wrong hole. Okay, so and then this pin on the trigger it does move backwards and forwards a little bit, but it's a captive pin. This one doesn't come out, it's just got a bit of movement on it, so you won't lose that one. Okay, so I'm not doing any work to the sear engagement faces. They're nice and shiny with no low spots or anything, so that's good to go. So I'll put the trigger back in. Now the only thing to watch, that bottom of that pin engages with the this hole here. This is where the transfer bar operates, and obviously it's operated by the trigger, so that pin locates in the transfer bar like that, and then the bolt operating lever, there's a little very small pin here which just sticks out and engages underneath this hole where the Q-tip is in the trigger, and just got to push the hand down a little bit. There you go. So if I lift that up, you'll see there it is. There's that pin there. You can see it sits underneath that surface of the trigger. So as you start to pull the trigger, you can see how the whole mechanism works there. The transfer bar moves up and the bolt comes down to allow the cylinder to rotate into the next position. Okay, cool. So that's just sitting in the frame of the revolver. Next one is the hammer. Here we are. So I've put my little spring back in. As you saw when I took this apart earlier, this silver piece just slides backwards and forwards. You can push it out either in that direction or this direction. It's not retained, and you can see if I can angle this so you can see it properly. There's a little spring-loaded pin there, and you can see what it does. It keeps that part under tension, and unfortunately, if you push this retaining piece more than halfway across, that pin and its retaining spring will shoot out at 300 miles an hour, and you'll never see it again. That spring's about that long. It goes about that far into the body of the hammer. So it's only a small spring. If you do lose it, you can make another pin easily enough. It's just a bit of steel, but finding the right spring might be a bit of a pain because it's really small diameter. So for goodness sakes, just leave that piece where it is. Right, so the hammer just slots back in through its hole in the frame, and there's the pin from the hammer which we took out earlier, and that engages into that retaining hole in the body. So just get it lined up in place. It's pretty obvious where everything goes really, because the parts kind of almost line up for you, and then just drop the retaining pin in by hand, feel around for it. There we go. So that's now pushed into its hole on the inside of the frame. Right, so the hammer and trigger mechanism are back in, so lined up properly with the bolt. The pins are in. Okay, cool. If I gently, I'm going to have to hold the trigger in with my finger here, or it'll all pop out. You can see kind of how the mechanism kind of interacts here. So that's just pivoting around there. So you can see the bolt comes down out the way of the cylinder, and as you start to pull the trigger, the hammer comes back and the transfer bar comes up to engage with the firing pin. Okay, cool. Right, so we've got to put the hand back in. So this is the piece that rotates the cylinder. This is fairly simple. Just goes through there. Easy if you're right-handed. So I'll line that up. Just sits on the trigger mechanism on that little pivot. There we go, and yeah, that's fine. That's in position now. So it just slots straight in. There's no trouble putting that piece back in. And again, if I just hold everything in place with a finger, you can kind of see there. Whoops. You can kind of see how everything starts to work together. Okay, and obviously it works the same if you pull from the hammer as well as the trigger. Okay, cool. So everything's in place. I'm still missing a few parts, of course. We've got the mainspring and its guide rods to put in place, so the actual gun can fire. There's the trigger retaining pin, which just goes in that little hole there. That just keeps the trigger in place. And we've got the all-important trigger tension spring as well. And this is a little swine to put back in. It's really only the only difficult bit. Right, let's get the mainspring back on the mainspring rod. So the idea is this spring normally goes up to the end stop on its retaining rod. You can see the end stop there. Okay, that round bit engages into a slot in the back of the hammer, and obviously that's all under tension, held here. So that gives you the mainspring. It's welly. Of course, you've got the problem that the spring's longer than the retaining rod. So the way you reassemble it, because it's quite a stiff spring, there's a hole in the rod there, and the trick to it is you've got to squash the spring down and then stick a paper clip or something similar through that hole, and it'll keep the spring in place. And it's a bit of a swine to do, so pardon me for swear on this bit. It's a really stiff hammer spring, and I'm a little bit weak. It's probably an easy way of doing this, but probably to find out what it is. So I'm just using the pliers to get some downward pressure on here. Must be an easy way of doing this. Gunsmiths all over YouTube are laughing at me now. So I'm holding the spring down, and I'm just going to put this little bit of steel through that hole. Oh, there it goes. Nah, how's that? So that's now held under tension, and that won't go anywhere until I pull this bit of paper clip free, and then it'll resume its former tension. Sorry folks, forgot to record this bit, but when you put the mainspring in, take the pin out that holds the hammer in place, and then the rod with the spring on it under tension will slide inside the hammer really easily, otherwise you can't get it in. Once it's in place, put the pin back in, and then pull the safety pin on the spring, and it'll be alright. Right, putting in the trigger pin. So for ease of clarity, I've removed the hand. Again, this can go in last anyway, so we'll leave that out. Okay, so the trigger spring, can't really get this wrong. It's shaped so you can't put it in back to front. You can see the long part that goes in the trigger's kind of got a kink in it. Okay, so that's the coil's going to sit on this rotating pin. The long arm with the spring goes inside a groove in the trigger, so when it's in its correct position, it kind of looks like this. So it kind of looks like that. Obviously this part's going to be inside the trigger rather than sitting on top, and this part here is under tension. It comes around here and it's actually resting against the back of the trigger here. So to be fair, it's a bit tricky to put back in, but it's not impossible. It's just a pain in the arse. So what I find is easiest is I'll get this part underneath the trigger first, and then I'll bring this part round with a set of pliers or something and just let it slip down here. Once it's held behind the trigger guard, it's not going to go anywhere, and then you can push the spring fully down over the retaining pin. So we'll give it a go. So first thing I've done there, I appreciate it's difficult to see, but I've just got the end of the spring in the gap inside the trigger, so that's hollow inside there. That's now sitting inside. Top of the spring's on there. So in theory, what I've got to do now is bring this end of the spring round to here, because this is where it gets tricky because it's a spring, and then it'll all drop down in place, and it'll sit just on riding on this part of the trigger housing here. Again, there's probably a really easy way of doing this, but I'm buggered if I know what it is. So I'll grab the end of the spring, pull it round. That's the way I'm doing this. If I let go and it springs back, it's not going to take my thumb with it or anything stupid like that. And although you can't see it, I am actually wearing safety glasses just in case something springs out. There it is. That got the bugger. So all I've done there, as carefully as I could, I've dragged the top of the spring round. You can see it's now sitting under tension just on that part of the trigger housing. There you go. You can kind of see that. Just going to push the spring all the way down. Ah, bugger. I've clipped it off. Hang on a second. Pull it round again. Once you get the hang of it, it's not that bad. There we go. So I've just pulled it back into position again. You can see there there's quite a bit of metal, and that springs all the way down on its body. That's fine, that's where it's supposed to be. Right, so I'll illustrate now how you can adjust the tension of the trigger. Okay, so obviously that part of the spring's now pushing upwards on the trigger, and that's what you feel when you start pulling the trigger. That's your trigger tension, and you can adjust it just by moving this retaining pin. So as you screw it, you can see it because it's an off-center pin. Sorry for wobbling the camera. There you go. Try get my screwdriver in. So yeah, you can see there as it moves, it's kind of off-center and it's adjusting the tension of the spring a little bit. And that's your trigger adjustment range right there. Okay, fair enough. Right, so I'll leave it roughly there. Okay, you can adjust that just by taking the wooden grips off. You don't need to do anything else. Right, the last thing I need to do is just put the hand back in. That just sits on this little pin here, and really it just slides through its slot in the back of the revolver body there. That's fine, that's in place. So you can see if I start simulating a double action pull, you can see all the parts are moving and lined up nicely, no problem. And single action would be, yeah, that's fine, that's working, that's moving great, no problem at all. Final reassembly. Okay, everything's in place, so what we need to do now is just put the top of the side of the frame back on, really, so everything's in place. Now there is a trick to this, and it's not obvious, because when you take the panel off, although it takes a bit of prising off, it just comes off. And you won't really spot that inside there's a spring-loaded plunger. And you can't reassemble it with a spring-loaded plunger in the out position. Okay, and there's a little hole here, right there, where you can put a pin through, and that will hold the plunger in place. And you can't reassemble it without this. This plunger, incidentally, gives the tension for the hand, if you're wondering what it does. So when it's in place, it's that way around. It's acting against the back of the hand to give it some spring pressure. So to reassemble, dead easy. Push the plunger in, and you can look through. You can't really see it in the webcam on the camera, but when you push the plunger in, you can see through this hole. And if you put something white behind it, you'll see where the mechanism, the spring, and the pin. That's it. Clears through, and there's a detent inside, and you put the pin through against the detent. So I'm just going to do that now. I know you won't see it on the camera because it's really, really tiny. There we go. So I've stuck the pin in, and you can see it's holding that plunger in place. What I'm going to do now is just withdraw the pin so it's just level with the inside of the body. There it is. So that can now go back on without any interference, but it's still holding the plunger down, and then obviously I'll just pull it out when it's in place. Right, so for the final reassembly, just check all the pins are in place. Everything looks stunningly normal in there, and then really just put it in place, push it down, that's it. And you can hear it click in place when it goes fully flush. It kind of clicks, which is nice. And then put your screws in, take that pin out, and you're done. Test. Yeah, that's working great. So double action, pull the hammer all the way back, click, and what's the trigger like? Yeah, not bad, reasonable. And double action, really much stiffer pull. Yeah, it's fine. You can see, if you just look where my thumb is there, you just see the hand come out. There it is. And that would be pushing the cylinder around. You can see the firing pin coming through there at the top, that's where my thumb is. That's all looking stunningly normal. Cool. Right, good job.